also because of the particular limitation on how people could join online. I'm also joined here by a couple of our colleagues from IDPS, Conflict Prevention, Peacebuilding and Responsive Institutions team as well. Musa Ibrahim, who leads the team on conflict prevention and peacebuilding, where the IDPS actually sits, and Duruk, who's the manager of the project for us, working closely with Isabella and a number of other colleagues. So very happy that you could all join us here today. And again, if folks are unable to join this particular session virtually live or in person, then I think there is the opportunity for them to be able to view the recording. I start off by maybe a quick introduction. My name is Samuel Rizk. I'm the head of the Conflict Prevention, Peacebuilding and Responsive Institutions team at UNDP's Crisis Bureau, hosting the IDPS Secretariat for the next 3 years, supported by Canada. So very happy to see us not here, but also very happy to see representatives of the IDPS constituencies and secretariats here as well. Another opening remark, very much appreciating our ability to actually participate in Alliance for Peacebuilding. Many thanks to, in the PeaceCon, in the Alliance for Peacebuilding, many thanks to Liz and the team for making this possible, and glad that some of our colleagues are actually there in person as well. Much appreciation to also USIP as the co-organizer for PeaceCon. USIP, I think for us and maybe for many colleagues online, has been a partner for a long, long time. We do a lot of consultation with them, regularly meet them when we're in DC, regularly see us, but have a lot of common interests and thematic areas related to prevention and peace as well, moving ahead. I think throughout the next over an hour, you will hear quite a lot of perspectives on where we are with the state of multilateralism. And I think as development entities, to a great extent, a lot of folks look around and ask us, why do you care if you are development partners? The simple answer is probably the following. Unmanaged, failed, broken, challenged multilateralism and bad politics are getting in the way of good development business. If you want to be effective as a development practitioner these days, you have to be aware of, think of, engage in, understand political economy or what is happening. Secondly, I think one of the most important things, and I think we learned this from our own reports, the Human Security Report that came out of the Human Development Report Office in Europe. There is a space, hopefully there is moving ahead, whether it's in relation to the Secretary General's Common Agenda for the new Agenda for Peace, where actors, even beyond governments, need to speak up about the state of multilateralism and why it's actually painful for them as well. This is no longer the domain of states engaging in issues that actually make politics better. If you've been following the Ukraine crisis for the last year or so, it is no longer an issue of interstate conflict as somewhere else in the world. So if I'm in Africa or Arab states, I don't care, or it doesn't touch me anymore. It only took a few days for people to feel the pinch in terms of food prices and fuel prices. It's not going to be next year. It's not going to be next month. It's going to be almost immediate, let alone the neighborhood in Europe, let alone everything else as well, the spillover for refugees, etc. Put cost of living on that, put COVID on that, put climate change on that, then I think everything around us has become a challenge. And as the States of Fragility reports and our own human development reports, etc., indicators are dipping in the wrong direction multiple years in a row. What does this mean for us? What does this mean for the SDGs, which will either not be achieved, or everybody or a lot of people are actually off track and we're only 7 minutes away from the 2030 agenda? I think that's mostly what we will hear today as well. There's a lot that's going to take place, I think, this year and next year. SDG Summit, Summit for the Future, what comes out of the new agenda for peace. Many things that are coming out that I think will address this issue of the challenges of multilateralism in relation to the achievement of SDGs, and why this is particularly critical for conflict and fragile affected settings. Why is there chronic underinvestment? Why is there a sense that the world cares about some and not others? This is all coming back, and I think it's becoming more clear. Our own IDPS constituency has also been seized with this for about a year now. Certainly since last summer, since we started having this discussion. We've put together this idea of what do the next 3 years look like in the state building and the peace building agenda. We'll hear maybe a little bit more about that as well. And how can we be more effective on multiple fronts? In the advocacy space, in the policy space, in the investment space, in the development space, et cetera, et cetera. How do we do it as government partners, development partners, and civil society? All of this that I mentioned in the short introduction is going to be represented and spoken about here from the different colleagues that are there. So without going into any more detail, let me just share with you the outline of what we're going to do. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we have 6 speakers who I will offer about 5 or 6 minutes each to present opening remarks, and then we will go into a Q&A. We have some conversation starters, but I think these are only to help the process rather than to actually offer answers to some of these questions. If we did have the answers, we wouldn't be having this discussion. We would be getting along with the business. So to a great extent, I think it's a great opportunity to have this consultation moving ahead. I'm going to, if everyone doesn't mind, I'm going to mention the 6 speakers, where they come from and their titles, get that out of the way, and then call upon them to provide their opening remarks, and then we'll jump in as well. We have with us Hasnat Johnson, all titles obviously observed. Hasnat Johnson, Deputy Director of Peace and Conflict Policy Unit, Conflict Prevention, Stabilization and Peacebuilding in Global Affairs Canada. Welcome, Hasnat. Jacques Michel Marc Anglade, who we affectionately call Marc Anglade right away. Welcome, great to see you again. National Coordinator for SDC CAED. He will tell us what that is when he speaks at the Ministry of Planning and External Cooperation in Haiti. Welcome, Mark. Gwendolyn, good to see you again. It's only been 2 or 3 weeks since we last had a chat with you, so super happy that you could join us for this particular discussion. Last time we chatted was obviously on the Pathways for Peace +5, so very happy to have you with us again. Founder and Executive Director of Messengers of Peace Liberia. Mariana Neves, a Governance and Statistics Specialist, UNDP Oslo Governance Center. Welcome, Mariana, from in-house capacity. And of course, our good friend and colleague, Habib Mayar, who's the Deputy General Secretary of the G7+, one of the 3 constituencies of IDPS. Welcome, Habib. Good to see you again. Good to see everyone as well. Online with us are the interpreters, a number of other colleagues. If anyone wishes to raise a hand or ask a question, Isabella will be with us to also be able to take those. But I see Isabella under the name of Hasnat wants to jump in really quick. Go ahead.
Yes, sorry, Sam. Just to say that we also have Catherine Howell with us today as a speaker.
Sorry. Catherine is on the list. It's not that you're not. Catherine Howell, independent consultant with a very close partner of ours, the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation. Very happy to have you with us, Catherine. I would not have missed you in the speaking order, but I was reading quickly after lunch, so I missed that. Welcome to everyone. Maybe we go straight forward to Hasnat. Over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Sam. And apologies if I don't look directly at the screen. We're having technical issues, so we'll be referring to my notes, which is on my laptop in this way. So I'll have a bit of a neck issue by the end of this session, but that's okay. So thank you so much, Sam, and thank you to IDPS colleagues for organizing this session at PeaceCon. I'm very happy to be here in this esteemed panel. As Sam mentioned, I'm the Deputy Director of Peace and Stabilization Operations Program at Global Affairs Canada, and I'm also representing Canada as the co-chair representative for the IDPS. Today's discussion, as Sam has outlined, focuses on effective multilateralism as a precursor to achieving SDG 16, which aims to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels in fragile and conflict-affected settings. Let me be clear, we're at a critical point for international cooperation. Today, global conflict and fragility are most affected by geopolitical shift and increased great power competition among state actors, proliferation of violent non-state actors, socioeconomic impact of global pandemic, as well as COVID-19, authoritarianism, democratic backsliding, and climate change. The world is facing a polycrisis, multiple concurrent economic, political, and ecological shocks converging to shape the globe for the next decade. More violent conflicts are starting than ending in fragile and conflict-affected settings, and such violence is cyclical. It persists and leads to more violence, which undermines the value of investment in humanitarian assistance and sustainable development. Within this backdrop, we need more effective multilateralism to address these collective global challenges and achieve SDG 16. This is why Canada is supportive of the United Nations Secretary General's new agenda for peace, as it provides an important opportunity to rethink the current multilateral order to one that is characterized by meaningful inclusion, solidarity, transparency, and support. It affords us the chance to examine how the UN and its member states, such as Canada, can adapt approaches, systems, and tools in response to the changed global peace and security environment, ensure that UN is well equipped to respond to emerging threats and challenges, and deliver on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Within this backdrop, the new Agenda for Peace has the opportunity to be underpinned by data, analysis, and partnership, which are essential to prevention and peace-building efforts to be effective and sustainable. Effective and productive partnerships that advances peace efforts are no longer restricted to government relationship. Civil society, multilateral, and international organizations all have a role to play in building a peaceful world. This is why Canada is so pleased to co-chair the IDPS and demonstrate its commitment to the realization of SDGs, notably SDG 16, by working closely with fragile and conflict-affected settings, including the G7+, as well as civil society and donor states. Canada is a staunch supporter of SDG 16. Its inclusion in 2030 Agenda represented a major milestone, highlighting the critical role played by peace, justice, and strong institutions as prerequisite to sustainable development. Recognizing that achieving progress is not just about development efforts only, Canada is taking a whole-of-department approach to the SDGs, leveraging our trade, diplomacy, advocacy efforts to help advance the goals. In doing so, it reinforces Canada's overarching objectives to strengthening a rules-based international system, supporting lasting peace and security, fostering prosperity, and advancing human rights, including diversity and inclusion and gender equality. We're honored that our Prime Minister has been chosen to co-chair the SDG Advocates Group alongside Prime Minister Motley of Barbados. It is an exciting opportunity for Canada to reinforce its leadership on the 2030 Agenda, particularly its efforts to advance gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, combat climate change, protect the planet, and enable access to quality education to all, and to foster a diverse and inclusive partnership for financing the SDGs and advancing sustainable development. And let me be clear, Canada is not only working towards the progress on SDGs internationally, but also domestically. And this is why effective multilateralism is so critical, because it also affords us an opportunity to look inward. The Canadian government's Cabinet Committee is charged with advancing more inclusive economic growth and with issues concerning the social fabric of Canada and the promotion of Canadian pluralism. We're walking the talk on building a peaceful world and hope to contribute to the UN's efforts in doing the same. To conclude, I'd like to emphasize the importance of a forum like the one we happen to be in to discuss with our partners and learn from each other in equal ground and work together to achieve the SDGs, both in our own nations and the world. We must make use of dialogue spaces like the IDPS to collaborate more closely, to co-learn and work together to achieve the SDGs, and most importantly, to make sure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's much appreciated. I'll come back to a couple of those themes in the comments and questions as well. Mark, I'm glad over to you. You may still be on mute. There we go.
Merci Samuel. Je remercie les organisateurs pour ce Peacebuilding 2023. Et il y a une petite précision que vous m'aviez demandé d'apporter tout au début.
Thank you for having me. There was a little precision I wanted to mention. I am coordinator on a national level for the Secretariat for the in Haiti, SDG CAED. In terms of today's panel, this conference, I believe, in my opinion, I think that to put things into context, or what Hasnat Johnson mentioned is important, because it's really important to remember that our current situation, we're living the shock from the pandemic, the Ukraine war, different conflicts. I'm not going to mention them all. I think that we've already spoke about that general situation that affects us and how we're living today. But I just want to say that every country is affected and intensifies the need for cooperation in general, including a humanitarian collaboration. I would say that the evolution, recent evolutions show what I would call the very important necessity of having a multilateral action that is coordinated. I insist on coordinated because coordination, in my opinion, is essential at all levels. And I wanted to underline that it's important to understand that in terms of PMA, fragility, and a lot of issues will slow down the possibility of obtaining or reaching the SDGs, and SDG 16 in particular, for peace and sustainable development. And so it's important to say that the collaboration seems to obey geopolitical goals as well, or tools for foreign policies. So for multilateral collaboration, it's also a factor that can block the efficacy of those issues. So this panel is going on for my country here in Haiti, who is in a very difficult situation in terms of security, the failure of the actual leaders, and the challenges of the country that is very fragile and vulnerable, with all the consequences that we know and that I will not enumerate. So combined to all of this, I would add that the gains that we have made to counter poverty, etc., those latest the latest gains have been affected by the current situation. And there's a cycle that's very difficult. It's a vicious cycle that feeds all of the conditions in favor of peace and development. So how
ce problème
can we
multilatéral efficace.
look at
Je propose quelques points liés
multilateralism in
à
this
mon expérience pratique
context based on my
sur la
practical
réalité globale des États
experience on
fragiles, mais aussi mon
the
expérience en
the,
la
the
matière d'Haïti,
fragility of
pour dire que la crise, ou mieux,
the situation
les
here.
crises actuelles, disons,
So the
vont
crisis
paupériser encore plus les
will
populations et développer sur
affect the
une
population
base
even more
exponentielle
and
le terreau générateur de
just
violence, de conflits et de
will
guerre.
bring about even more
Donc, pour
conflict
moi,
and war.
les constats,
For
et
me,
aussi, je ne peux
what
pas
I
m'empêcher de
see,
faire certaines propositions, sont les
and
suivantes.
it's a bit of a
Un,
proposal,
je constate que la
one,
réalité internationale, comme justement
reality,
souligné, a
international
beaucoup
reality
évolué,
has
et
evolved
il
a
est
lot.
survenu d'importants changements
And there
auxquels,
has been important
cependant, on peut
changes
affirmer
where we
concrètement
can
que
say
18 ans
concretely
après
that
Paris
18
et 11 ans
years
après
and
Busan, les
11
principes
years after
adoptés en
Busan,
matière
the principle that
d'efficacité
was adopted
restent,
for
à mon avis,
efficacy
pertinents.
remains
Cependant,
relevant. However,
les questions fondamentales concernant
the
la
fundamental
libre concurrence
question
sur les priorités et les procédures,
on
de
the priority of
transparence
the
sont
procedures and
défauts partout
transparency
dans les États fragiles et
for
notamment
every
d'Haïti.
fragile
Et ceci est
state
souvent couplé
is
et en
often
même temps
cut,
occasionne, et c'est là aussi l'aspect du cercle vicieux, un manque
and it brings about this vicious
patent
cycle,
au niveau de la coordination d'ensemble. Le
affects
second point que j'aimerais souligner,
coordination.
c'est
And
que
the
partout dans
second
nos
point
pays,
is that
le
everywhere in
secteur
my
privé,
country,
s'il
the
est
private sector
indéniablement un acteur important
is an
et
important
incontournable,
factor.
est aussi, dans
It's
beaucoup de cas,
also, in a
un
lot of
facteur de
cases,
violence et de
a
déstabilisation.
factor of
Le
violence and
troisième point,
instability. And the third
la
point,
réflexion profonde sur la
the reflection
multilatéralité,
on multilateralism
la coopération multilatérale,
and
est que
multilateral
d'abord, les
cooperation is that
coopérations doivent viser
it
non
has
pas
to
le respect
target
de
not the
l'orthodoxie financière,
respect of the
mais
orthodoxy
surtout
on a
les
financial
priorités
level,
de
but
croissance
the
et de
priority in
développement.
terms of growth and
Il faut faire
development.
passer les
We have
normes
to
comptables, les
have
évaluations et les
standards, accounting
résultats
standards. We have to have results on a physical level that has to come
l'impact sur le
after the
développement est
development
beaucoup plus
objectives, because the
important
impact
que
on development
l'impact
is way more important than the
de la
physical,
coopération multilatérale.
financial
Ça,
impact of
les
the
institutions multilatérales,
multilateral
comme nos partenaires
cooperation.
bilatéraux, doivent
So
comprendre
our
ça.
partners have to be aware of this.
L'avant-dernier point que
And
j'aimerais souligner, c'est
one
que
more point before
il
I
nous faut aussi
conclude,
regarder la
we also have to
sacro-sainte
look at the
formule de la bonne
formula
gouvernance telle que comprise
of
actuellement. Je pense que elle est un peu bancale dans nos pays à nous.
I
Si
think
elle
in our
n'intègre pas
countries,
la satisfaction ou disons
it
mieux,
has to
si elle n'est pas
include the
comprise
satisfaction,
dans
or
le
it has to
prisme
be
de la
understood
satisfaction des besoins
in
fondamentaux
terms of
et n'intègre pas
satisfaction
le
of
renforcement des
needs.
capacités. Et je donne un exemple simple. Pour moi, il n'y a pas de bonne
And
gouvernance possible. Cette bonne gouvernance
there's no
suppose
governance
le
that is
multilatéralisme
possible
sans
for
renforcement des capacités.
multilateralism
Et il y a une
if we
façon
don't have that
simple
capacity. So
d'appuyer
there
les
are
États,
simple ways
tous les
to
États fragiles,
support the
d'appuyer
fragile
nos pays
states.
en la matière, c'est
Our
avoir une
country,
interface concrète
we
avec
need
partenaires qui connectent
to
ou
have a
directement. Le
concrete
plus difficile,
interface
Samuel, le plus
directly
difficile pour affiner les
with
diagnostics
the
technologiques
UNPD
et nous permettant
for
de
technology and
bénéficier
to
des
allow us to
programmes
benefit from
de structures en
programs
ligne
that
du
are
programme d'action de Doha. Et ça
in
va aider
line with the
concrètement au
priority.
renforcement de capacités nécessaires si on
So we
veut
have to
arriver
look
à
at
une bonne
those
gouvernance
necessary
que prône
capacity to have a good
la
government
coopération multilatérale. Donc,
and
pour moi,
multilateral
pour
collaboration. So
promouvoir et consolider la
to
paix et
promote
renforcer
and
l'État, il
consolidate
faut s'appuyer
peace,
sur la croissance
we
économique,
have
il faut
to
le développement, ça marche de pair.
have
Il n'y a pas de paix
development. There's
ni
no
de renforcement de
peace
l'État sans
or
croissance et développement et vice-versa.
or
Donc, pour
solid
nous,
state
il nous
without
faut
this.
aller
So for us,
vers le
we have to
soutien
have support
concret,
concretely
soutenu de la
and
transformation structurelle comme outil en
constant for the structural
et
change
ceci ne
as
peut
an
se
engine.
faire avec
And
l'établissement
this can
uniquement
only
d'évaluations
happen
purement comptables. Et cette transformation de nos pays,
not only
dans les
with
États
an
fragiles,
accounting
dans les
system. So
PMA en
for
général,
PMAs, fragile states, and us in Haiti, we need more space, in my opinion, for South-South collaboration and triangular collaboration, and take advantage of science and technology. However, I think, and allow me to highlight this, we have to resolutely act to counter what I would call the syndrome of the humanitarian ONG, this incapacity to see beyond the humanitarian objective for bilateral engagement and unilateral engagement. We repeat this, it's necessary to have investments that are sustainable for multilateralism and not only humanitarian help. So I also want to add that to reach SDG 16, I think there's also a certain mechanism that we have to put in place. So just a proposal like any other one to have a better dialogue for peace and missions. You know that in some countries we're more able to acquire some knowledge, and why not put more resources for the Secretariat for CSPS to have a better dialogue in fragile states like us in Haiti, like for the elections that would help the peace process and the objectives. So quickly, with this world partnership, every collaboration partner have to find a balance on the short term and have this vision for well-being on the long term, for the planet, for the fragile states, for everybody, for all of the population that we represent in the world. Otherwise, the context of fragility will continue to worsen, and the cycle of the violence will continue to prevent peace. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. No, very clear, and I'll come back to a couple of those themes, but I suspect some of our colleagues will actually address some of these as well, whether it's where we are with fragility, but certainly with a perspective on accounting for where we are with SDG 16, certainly. So we'll come back to that, and our favorite subject, obviously, where humanitarianism fits in that humanitarian development peace nexus and SDGs and the response of the international community. Thanks for pointing that out as well. Gwendolyn, over to you.
Okay. So, hello everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. So, hello everybody, and I bring you warm greetings from our over 1,500 young volunteer peace messengers here at Messengers of Peace Liberia, and also in my capacity as an executive committee member of the Civil Society Platform for Peacebuilding and Statebuilding, CSPPS. So in terms of our conversation today, as we explore how effective multilateral engagement can support realizing SDG 16 in fragile and conflict-affected settings, and also reflecting on how multilateral partners can ensure more inclusive resourcing of prevention and peace-building efforts, including effective funding, financing, and resourcing, and especially drawing from our work in Liberia with Messengers of Peace. In terms of this reflection, I'd like to say just for a little bit of introduction, Messengers of Peace Liberia, the non-for-profit that we run, is a youth-led peace-building organization. We work on the Youth Peace and Security Agenda, and as well building the connection with the Women Peace and Security Agenda as well. So all of the different resolutions of the YPS and together with WPS, and as well taking into consideration now what we call the African Union Continental Framework on Youth, Peace, and Security. So with all of that, we do a lot of our work with the active involvement of young people. So whether it's with our community mediation programs or political mediation, which has to do a lot with our electoral process, whether it's our gender sensitivity program from the Gender Connect, promoting young women to get involved in politics, or whether it's from our cohort of young mediators, breaking cultural biases in a different context that we work on the ground, and as well what we call our theater component or our dialogue process, where we engage community leaders and community from a holistic standpoint. These are some of the things that we do. But it's important to start this. I will start with a quote from Martin Luther King. Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make subject and verb agree. You just need a heart that is full of grace, or soul generated by love. This is the story of the work we do here at Messengers of Peace Liberia, with our active involvement of 1,500 young people and resources to manage peace building efforts efficiently and effectively in Liberia. We cannot be able to reflect, especially on how multilateral partners can ensure more inclusive resourcing of prevention and peace building efforts if we do not discuss challenges, taking into account what we call the sources of funds and funding modality as well for civil society organizations. We look at lack of structural ability to mobilize resources and the capacity also to absorb the funds. It's one thing to mobilize, and it's another thing to have the capacity to absorb funds. We also look at the procedures and the disbursement of funds that come to non-for-profit and civil society organizations. They are too tedious, hectic, and just so much restricting. But in terms of what we call, there's also the issue of favoritism. The current dispensation of practice is to release funds to quote unquote established organizations that use their status quo to funnel funds. There's a lack of trust, the space, and the capacity. There are limited youth and women involvement and the participation, which is also constrained by poor funding support and lack of government subsidiaries, resulting in the over-dependency on extended aid that is slow also in its dispensation. There are also opportunities that we have now, and there are various multilateral partner platforms that exist for Peacebuilding Fund, African Peace Fund, etc. But in terms of our recommendations moving forward and how we can all address this, I would say let's focus more on capacity building programs. Funding support is never voluntarily given by the funding agencies. It must be requested by those in need of it. However, therefore, we must build the capacity of NGOs and civil society organizations to receive and absorb funds. We also need to create opportunities for peace building funds from multilateral agencies to be pooled so as to be committed, willing, and passionate youth-led and women-led civil society groups can be able to also access these funds. Supporting young people and women to increase access to finance and funding will help them to create job opportunities for self and for others. We also need to coordinate information sharing. We need to bring fairness, objectivity, and transparency to bear. This should be spiced with equity, integrity, and as well accountability. We also need to encourage NGOs and civil society organizations to connect and play a significant role in resourcing of prevention and peace building efforts. Before I conclude, especially on this platform for PeaceCom 2023, and as well with this organized event from the International Dialogue on Peacebuilding and Statebuilding IDPS, I will say, as I began with another quote from Martin Luther King, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? We need to be doing peace business differently. If we are going to change and anchor youth-led and women-led civil society organizations and their efforts in the pathway to building a sustainable and peaceable society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gwendolyn. Inspiring as always. I hope you'll share your statement with us as well. Quite a lot there, and I'll come back to some of the questions as well. We have 3 more colleagues to speak. Thanks very much to everyone who stayed within the 5 to 6 minute limit. We have Mariana, Catherine, and Habib. Let's go quickly to Mariana.
Thank you so much. It's not easy to come after Gwendolyn. That was a very exciting speech. Especially, I'm going to speak of data and the need of data. So I'm from UNDP Oslo Governance Center, and we are responsible for measurement of the indicators. So everyone has been speaking on what we need to do and need to be on track. So how do we actually measure this to be on track? On UNDP, we are directly responsible for the measurement of access to justice, satisfaction, public service, representation, participation, public service in judiciary, and external political efficacy. And among our responsibilities, we support member states in measuring, following their own need and their own priority at that stage. As you all know, we want to say we're going to achieve 2030, but the fact is we have no idea if we're going to achieve because we don't have the data to tell us if we're going to achieve it or not. We have the goal which has one of the least data availabilities. Despite this, between 2015 and today, we went from almost zero data to 40% of the countries having at least some indicators. And there's 2 reasons. One is because we're trying to measure things that are very, very complex. And the second is because this is the work we do. It's a very new in official statistics, but a very good news is that this year, governance statistics, peace statistics, human rights statistics, they were recognized by the United Nations Statistical Commission as a field of official statistics, at the same level as economic statistics or social statistics. So really elevating that these are parts that we should and need to measure. And I would like to say that for us on UNDP, we work with UNODC OSHR, trying to coordinate our measurement, and we support on the measurement access to justice of corruption, discrimination, governance, violence, trafficking persons, which are phenomena there are all countries, all states go through it. And when developing the methodology, one of our piloting countries was Somalia. And what we found on this process was, I'll go through some very small list of lessons, but I think it's a very important lessons that we've learned. One is we needed the cooperation between the member states when measuring. This we're talking just statistics, but it was very essential. It is easier for the member states to communicate between them in a peer exchange of the difficulties that they have. Because one thing is we try to impose a methodology up-down, which is very beautiful, but it might not work on the ground. So in the process, we found that one, there's this need. Another, we needed a lot of coordination between actors, particularly external actors, because all of us want data. We go to several operations to the same country, sometimes very similar operations, and this has a very high cost to the institution who have to go through it, the financial cost. So there's this need of this broad national assessment, but also coordination between us. So we reduce our burden. A close collaboration of national actors, because they have the assessment of what's happening. They can help us identify youth organizations, peace organizations, all of them. They can help us improve the operations, so they actually respond to what you need and not what we need. So you can actually respond to what is your need at that specific moment. In other settings, we might need a survey every 5 years, every 3 years, but in a fragile state, the context can change rapidly and information is vital. So we need more frequent. If we need more frequent, we have to really make good use of what we're collecting. There are also some lessons that are not so good. Is that we've also found that the information is very valuable, good side, but then bad side as well, because we're collecting information, for instance, on who is dissatisfied, who is critical to the government. This is a very, very precious information, but it can be used in not the best way, which means that all of us, a great investment that we do when trying to measure has to be the privacy and confidentiality of the information we're collecting. It seems very simple, but because of this two possible use of the information, it becomes really vital that we establish very rigid protocols. And the last information that would be big lesson is that we needed to adapt, sometimes not to best measures. Our surveys, they're very delicate because, for instance, we collected sexual violence, psychological violence, which is very delicate phenomenon. We had to adapt them to not only the survey, but even when we're interviewing, because we are talking about population who already have been victimized. We don't want our operations to re-victimize them. We want to be sensitive. So that means sometimes we want information, but we might have to forego some, so we don't do harm in the process. So I think, Samuel, am I good on time? And that was my very small contribution. And I pass to my next speaker.
Thanks very much, Mariana. Very small, very valuable. I think we'll come to a number of these issues as well. Certainly the conflict sensitivity and the do no harm part, but a few other things as well. Catherine, over to you, and then we'll go to Habib.
Great. Thank you, Samuel, and thank you for the invitation to speak at this esteemed panel. As Samuel mentioned, I'm an independent consultant. I've worked across the sort of private sector, also in the development field for peace building at the UN Peacebuilding Support Office, and in the humanitarian field, formerly for the International Committee of the Red Cross. So sort of seeing sort of the world from different spaces, and I'm currently working on behalf of the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation. And we're really in the sort of first phase of sort of exploring how the opportunities and challenges that the youth, peace and security field are sort of, and the community are facing, could be met through private sector funding, investment and partnerships. And I've been asked today just to kind of draw out some of the sort of key findings from our early work. In terms of the meta level framing, you know, I think as Samuel's already said, you know, ODA is effectively diminishing, in particular funding for peace building and prevention is far behind demand. And this gap becomes more pronounced when we consider the needs of young people in peace building context. You know, we're really sort of data poor. I think Mariana's sort of like elaborated a lot on this point. And, you know, we know from mounting evidence, though, as, you know, as Gwendolyn has already said and covered so well, that both youth-led and youth-serving work is vastly under-resourced. And, it, you know, it's not just the quantity of that funding, it's the absorption capacity and, you know, the quality of that funding and how it comes through. And at the same time, you know, young people are demographic majorities in conflict-affected countries and face growing and multi-pronged crisis. Really play a significant role in peace building, as we know, as powerful mobilizers, working across silos with credibility, knowledge, and access to marginalized communities. And whilst we'll always call for increases in the quality and quantity of ODA, we recognize there are potentially opportunities to transform some approaches to financing by exploring the potential role that the private sector can play. And while you know, we really do recognize that the private sector can have a negative impact on peace, as Mark has mentioned, we're trying to look here and sort of identify places where we can accelerate the implementation of the SDGs, especially, of course, including SDG 16, with sort of identifying these spaces for private sector collaboration. But there really sort of tends to be some lack of understanding of what the partnerships can look like, and what it's kind of going to take to mobilize some of these partnerships. We speak different languages, there's sort of all sorts of barriers around creating a key sort of space around what the business case is for these partnerships. And lots of different organizations have sort of challenges in forming those, and I'm happy to sort of elaborate further on. So it's really from this context that the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation, with the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security, began a working group with a steering committee membership from governments, multilateral bodies, private sector actors and civil society to unpack this sort of big question. And the group really has a strong vision to foster a more coordinated ecosystem of sort of these multi-sector actors to simulate and stimulate sort of that space of private sector investment. So I'm just going to touch on some of the sort of findings of this foundational work, bearing in mind it only started in December. We're still very much at the global level, which is problematic in itself. But what we're trying to do is try and answer sort of two key questions. Firstly, what are the sort of, kind of salient challenges and opportunities that the YPS community are facing? And then really sort of try and identify what the role is of what we call innovative finance and public-private partnerships to sort of bring forward some of the solutions to these challenges. And we effectively undertake a sort of matchmaking process to see and identify where those spaces exist. To sort of answer these two key questions, we've sort of broken down the work to 4 different work streams. This is reflecting both the pluralism of where the private sector could be involved, as well as the multitude of challenges and opportunities faced by young peace builders. So I'm just going to quickly run through those work streams. The first one's focused more on sort of like mobilizing more grant resources, where we know there's sort of a huge need, not just for, again, volume, but quality and ability to access funding. We're looking at here a kind of range of options from micro levies and taxes to cause marketing, crowdfunding and donor advised funds. And those are sort of aimed at very different philanthropic markets. So for example, levies would be targeting large corporates who, are really seeking to sort of strengthen their brand with social causes. We're obviously seeing more consumer, push to corporates in that space. You can see 1% for the planet's a good example there. But we're also looking at where individuals can be, increasing their individual giving to this field. The second work stream is equally broad, and we're exploring the role of investment, where, here we're looking at impact investors and development finance institutes who are obviously seeking their money back and some return on that investment. And again, here, got a whole range of different sort of instruments from impact bonds into Peace are doing some incredible work trying to create a new asset class called peace bonds. To sort of redress some of those challenges around what makes impact sort of peace positive, bonds more peace positive, as it were. And within this work stream, we're also going to explore an impact bond around access to education or livelihoods, which have been 2 key challenges identified by young peace builders. And this sort of instrument can also help to sort of strengthen some of the data gaps that we see in this field. The third work stream relates to then this sort of actual investment criteria that's applied by investors when they make investments into fragile contexts. And, I think somebody mentioned there's been a lot of work around conflict sensitivity and do no harm for several years. But we're really asking here, what will it take for investors to really think about what positive peace looks like when they're making those investments? So, for example, investment criteria could include such conditions like shared asset ownership, where resources between community and the state and the private sector are shared more equally. These are hard questions, and what our research has sort of uncovered is, really positive in many respects, because there are actors across government, civil society, as well as multilateral development banks already working quite hard in this space. We haven't seen widespread adoption, but I think that, the more we can collaborate and put our minds together on this, the faster we can accelerate this work stream. Finally, then, the sort of fourth work stream is a sort of catch-all around private-public partnerships that really think about collaboration that sort of goes beyond money. The private sector can bring a sort of set of networks, expertise, and resources. Of course, they're large employers, so they can enhance livelihood opportunities if done in the right way. But young peace builders can, make an enormous contribution to economic stability, and that's a benefit for the private sector too. So really working on that sort of, business case for peace. In summary, what we're trying to do right now is sort of build what I call like a innovation portfolio, and that's sort of a set of options where we're going to look at several different possible solutions. And a final report will be out in a few months and sort of welcome, the community's feedback on how we can shape and strengthen this work. Just three final key learnings. I don't know if Samuel, you're going to cut me off for time, but three key things in concluding. I think we've got to acknowledge the breadth of potential roles of the private sector, and we can't be leading with top-down solutions. We have to sort of really build on the participation of young people throughout the whole life cycle of these solutions, from the very start in our research, which is what we've been doing, to sort of design and implementation. And, that's what we need to sort of change the power relationships that currently persist and exist within the funding system, if we're going to see meaningful change. And finally, there is a lot of sort of unknowns as to what's going to work in this field. It's definitely not a panacea by any means, but there are a lot of actors making investments into this area. And so we see a real need to coordinate a lot of those efforts, as well as sort of simultaneously fill the sort of gaps and build this sort of innovation portfolio. So it's very much a long-term endeavor. It's very broad and requires a sort of investment into this sort of coordination and research and development, and that sort of continued participation and inclusion of young people in this process. So I want to thank you. I've probably gone over time, but I just wanted to bring those points across, and thank you again. Over back to you, Samuel.
Thanks very much, Catherine. No, everyone that's gone over time has already answered a couple of questions, so I think we're well within the dialogue part as well. Habib, over to you, and then I'll come back with a few comments and questions as well. Maybe we have one or two more rounds for chats, including anyone online as well. Habib, over to you.
Thank you, Sam. I think the benefit of being at the last speaker is that because everything else has great speakers. It's not much for me, but I will try to make some sense. This opportunity on behalf of the G7 Plus group. For those of you who are unaware of the G7 Plus, it's an intergovernmental organization of conflict-affected countries. Our secretariat is based in Timor-Leste, Delhi. Haiti has been more active member, including Liberia. But currently, I'm speaking and joining you from my hometown, Afghanistan, where I here on leave. I would like to just make three quick intervention, maybe reflections on what has been said, and also in trying to respond some of the questions. First of all, yes, we know that today's world is marked by polycrisis, which is multipolar and interlinked together. And as one of the speakers says, I think Mark said that every country has been affected by this crisis. And I would add that conflict-affected and fragile states have been disproportionately affected. These crises have been very brutal to those countries which have already been fragile and conflict-affected. I can give you the examples of countries in the G7 Plus where there has not been lasting stability for at least 3 to 4 decades. My own country is a prime example, and I can go on with the name in Haiti, Central African Republic, Somalia, Yemen, and all of them. And you could imagine that, these countries have not even had an experience of of having a state that is sustainable, that is lasting, and that is responsive to the people's needs. And you could imagine how this poly-crisis could affect these countries. And also in relation to the poly-crisis or the multipolar, we are facing today, these countries have not, proportionately equal contribution to making this crisis. Unfortunately, they have been receiving as a diverse impact, more than what they would deserve, I would say. Be that climate crisis, climate change, these countries have not been, contributors to the climate change and to the pollution, but they are feeling the brunt of it in terms of, floods, droughts, and, you name it. Same goes to geopolitical tensions. These countries have been at the receiving end of all the crises and all the brutalities that have been created and being caused by big power politics. But we are receiving the brunt. Now, looking at them, of course, I would say that the only way out is cooperation. And as you all know, Harari said that, the Homo sapiens dominated the world because of cooperation. And I think that's very relevant for today, crisis. No country can, solve this crisis, a country which is the most developed or most powerful, or a country which is, developing, but they cannot solve these problems alone. We need cooperation. And for that cooperation, of course, multilateralism is the only answer. And we have no choice. It's the only choice that we have to cooperate, and we have to solve this problem through multilateral solutions. What is missing here? Of course, we have the United Nations, we have the Agenda 2030, we have multilateral organizations. What is missing is that today's multilateralism has been dominated by geopolitical tensions among few powerful nations. I apologize for being a bit frank, but I think the topic, we have to speak to some of the realities. And that has been one of the reasons that where we could claim that multilateralism has not been effective. The SDG, particularly SDG 16, was a tool and a bound that could bring us together on common, objectives for all the humanity. And it is an opportunity that can bring us all together and join hands to address those challenges. Unfortunately, we have already been in the almost halfway or midway towards the aspiration that we have set forth. So we are also running out of time, which means that we have not been effective in, effectively using or consuming the potential of the SDGs that we have with us. Now, my third point, which is my last point, how can we make it effective, and how can we, address the ineffectiveness of multilateralism? The first and foremost, we need to agree and come together on something that is founded on our common aspiration for peace for everyone and for shared prosperity. This is easy said done, of course, but that's why we have the SDGs, this peace and effective institution and justice for all. This also means that the multilateral system that we have should be more inclusive and fair. What do I mean by this is, as I mentioned earlier, that the multilateralism has been hijacked by few powerful, actors here. We need to change that. We need to make it more inclusive by giving space to countries from all over the world, from countries that are poor, that are developing, and that are conflict-affected states. And I think we have a good precedence. We have the International Dialogue on Peacebuilding and Statebuilding, which is a unique, platform, which provides a space to those countries which are usually left behind, and they had been left behind on every space. But I think this platform could change that narrative, could provide that platform where we could be more inclusive and where we could, ensure that these countries and these citizens are not left behind. We need to be, cognizant of the time that, of the fact that without inclusive partnership and without inclusivity in the multilateralism, we cannot, be effective in addressing these challenges. That's why I would like to maybe raise a couple of points that might become more food for thought. we as a community of the IDPs, we need to think, how can we actualize this, or how can we realize this potential that we have gotten? We also, admit, and I'm sure that you all will agree with us, that, we have not been able to optimize this potential. The potential that we have gotten, we have not been able. I think we need to lift up our spirit under the International Dialogue on Peacebuilding, and this is a very unique trilateral organization. I can say that this is unprecedented in today's, world. We have the civil society organizations, we have the donors, and we also have the G7+, which are the conflict-affected countries. And one of the most important contributions that this platform has done is the creation of the New Deal, as Mark earlier mentioned, which is now becoming even more relevant. And the second one is it has enabled the conflict-affected countries to cooperate among themselves, through peer learning and South-to-South engagement. Conventionally, this was not the case because, we were labeled as fragile. And if you could say that, if you could propose that fragile countries could cooperate among themselves, the question would be that, what is there for them to cooperate? But we have identified that, these countries, despite the challenge that they have gone, there are some inspiring changes that they have adopted. They have been able to consolidate peace, and those lessons could inspire other countries. But I think we also have to capitalize on that. We have created what we call fragile cooperation, where the G7+ countries cooperate among each other, and not only the G7+, but other fragile and conflict-affected states as well, like Rwanda or Colombia or Cambodia. These countries have a lot to share, and these countries have a lot to inspire each other. And I think that is one of the opportunities. I would like to conclude my remarks by reminding one more thing, that we speak about the financing for peace building and peacekeeping. We need to, be careful when we say that we are running out of resources and we don't have sufficient resources for peace building. It doesn't only mean budgets, peacekeeping operations. We in the countries, when we talk about pursuing peace and stability and supporting peace, we need to also support those local actors who are pursuing peace, who are promoting national dialogue, who are promoting reconciliation. We should not leave them behind. And I think my sister referred to that. There are local actors in these countries who have access to the local communities, but they are underfunded. They're even underfunded in terms of moral support from international community and also from the government as well. And we need to take that in consideration. I think I will stop here, and I will be happy to respond to any other of the questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Habib. Thanks, everyone. I think in the course of the presentations, you actually responded to a lot of questions that I would have answered, I would have asked, or would have opened the floor for. There are a few things that maybe in the next 12 minutes, I'd like everyone to comment on as well, maybe in one more round, and in any particular order. We don't have to go through the whole thing again. I'm stunned by how many times coordination was mentioned. And you often hear about coordination if you're sitting in a meeting with OCHA or DCO. But Habib, can you still hear us? It might be on your end, unless, can everyone hear me at least?
Now I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, good. So coordination, I think, has come up in all of the statements. And I think if you add coordination, collaboration, etc., all of that stuff. And I wonder if this is a function of one or two things. One is basically, why doesn't it happen? Is it a matter of political will or the perception of scarcity of resources, availability of information, etc.? I think it's good to explore this kind of concept as well, which is what is getting in the way of better coordination? And what is it that actually needs to be coordinated? We are in IDPS, effectively a political platform for advocacy purposes, coordinating messages, coordinating data, coordinating collaboration, SSTC, etc. That could be one way. Coordinated action, I think, is the kind of thing that is unique about IDPS as well, between government, development partners, and civil society. What is it that I think is blocking coordination and collaboration? I think really stands out as well. Multilateralism, the subject of this particular session. About a year ago, we came out in UNDP with a human development report, a special report on human security that talked about networked multilateralism. Is that just a terminology gimmick? Is it just basically trying to escape the reality of the challenges of multilateralism by saying we can actually do it through another means, but we're still stuck? Or is there actually something there about networked multilateralism that is both horizontal and vertical? So the connections between local and national actually come up, super important for SDGs, but the connection among different configurations of partners, horizontal, global civil society platform, global development partners collaborating together, and global engagements between fragile and conflict-affected states like G7+. Is network multilateralism a helpful frame for thinking about what comes next if we feel everything is blocked? We lost Habib, maybe? I don't see Habib, but it was Habib. We'll come back to that, but maybe Isabella, you can check. At least 2 or 3 different mentions of the role of the private sector. I think we often hear about the private sector as a panacea. Everybody starts to talk about why don't we get the private sector involved, as if it is always positive as a value, etc. But I think there is an issue there, and I think one of the key issues as well that is a responsibility for all of us in relation to financing, especially in conflict and fragile settings, and working with other partners like the private sector, is the issue of risk management, risk mitigation, risk sharing, burden sharing, the challenges of risk transference, etc. So why is it that conflict and fragile affected settings are underrepresented in financing? We have for example, the Climate Finance for Sustaining Peace report that we did about a year ago that indicated that the share of the individual from the big climate and environment funds is $120 per capita in normal settings. In fragile settings, it's $10. In highly fragile, highly vulnerable settings, it's $2. That is an astounding, I think, disparity or discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots, between who gets access to funding and who doesn't. And why we wonder that, a greater development investment doesn't actually work. 1 or 2 more points that I think came out as well, which are important to note, is, and I think this relates quite a bit to the data and information, SDG 16, but also beyond as well. A lot of the language that's come out in our human development reports, and I think moving ahead in the SDG Summit, will likely go well beyond this idea of beyond GDP and beyond averages and etc. The numbers game either does not adequately capture the urgency and the emergency, especially if you hear from Mariana that SDG 16 for a while had nothing. And if we actually have the data, then we need to be very careful about how it's used, particularly. So beyond averages, beyond GDP, recurring issues of debt, sanctions, etc., is this vicious cycle that was already described as was mentioned, that doesn't enable rapid recovery or investment or anything else. So I think there are a number of issues that are on the table. I'd like to give maybe 2 minutes to each of the colleagues to reflect also on what you heard from me, but also what you heard from others as well. And I think all within the spirit of, okay, so we know all of these things. We know that the moment is now for the next 7 years of the SDGs. We know the challenges. What is maybe the 1 or 2 takeaways that each of you would like to take with you as an advocacy point or as a messaging point, also for the IDPS Secretariat and the constituency, that we can elevate? We have a work plan, we know what we want to do, but I think we can accelerate that quite a bit more. Musa and Duruk are here with me in the room as well. I wonder if they want to jump in with any questions or comments before we go back to the group. One point from Musa
on the growth and development. I think that is a bit interesting because there is a lot of discussion whether we go for growth or development, and are they similar or they different? And I think that is a good, maybe also to hear some reflection. It was mentioned by, I think by Habib, the issue of growth and development, and I think it would be good to hear some reflection on that.
Thanks very much, Musa. I think it is actually a critical point, and I think it's coming out quite a bit as well, especially if you look around the world now. The prospect of recovery is much longer. 1 or 2 more days worth of armed conflict or violent conflict will not take 1 or 2 more days once the guns stop to recover. Likely to take months or years. One catastrophic event in Turkey and Syria in just a span of a few minutes, unimaginable displacement, unimaginable loss and damage, etc., on top of an already existing crisis. 2 or 3 weeks worth of flooding in Pakistan, $30 billion worth of loss, and much more displacement. Ongoing discussions, ongoing violence in Sudan, I think is problematic as well. Everybody that leaves in a span of 2 weeks, how do they come back? And when do people actually give space for peace and cooperation? So now it's become 1 minute, actually 30 seconds. I don't know if do we automatically go off air in 3 minutes or no?
I'm not sure if we go off air, but we do have quite a hard stop, and we will have to leave the room that we're in. So maybe if everyone can just provide one quick takeaway each.
If Hasnat has to leave the room, one quick takeaway.
Oh, good. I'm on the spot. Just quickly, I think, Sam, your question about what's the obstacle in coordination, and I was reflecting on that, particularly from as a donor country, and from my perspective, when I think, and I would love to engage this in follow-up conversation, is this competition. There seems to be competition for resources, competition for power, competition for access, and sometimes there's a perceivedness of finite resources or finite access or finite power, and therefore people fight over each other to get that, and that prevents us from actually coordinating with one another. And then one comment on Habib's excellent intervention on rethinking multilateralism. Couldn't agree more. I think it has been hijacked. I think everyone outlined how we are facing a new world, polycrisis, pandemic, democracy backsliding, and therefore the old way or the original way of working no longer applies. So therefore we have to rethink multilateralism in such a way that gives equal voice, equal access to power, and equal opportunity for change.
Thank you very much, Hasnat, for joining us. I hope you can stay as long as possible before somebody enters the room. Maybe Habib, since your name was called, can I go to you next? One takeaway.
Yeah, thank you. I lost most of the conversation because I have unstable connection here. I think these are all hard questions, but of course very important, and particularly your call on how we can improve coordination. And again, I mean, I would reciprocate. I couldn't agree more that there is a competition, and that's one of the reasons we have seen that we undermine the coordination. But I would also add that, you know, behind all this, there's one thing, and that's politics. and we cannot undermine the role of politics. And I think, as you mentioned, that IDPS is a political platform. I think we need to realize or optimize that in our advocacy. We need more political buy-in, more political support, and more political will, if I may. And also how to induce that will. That's also another important question. And I would put on the spot my colleagues from the civil society. They have a role to play, not only in the global south, but I think also in the global north. I have said that many times. You have the power to influence, the politicians. In global north, you have even more voice and more potential that you could do it. So that would be my takeaway. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Habib. I thought that was a segue to Gwendolyn, but then it turned into the global north, colleagues. So I was going to say Catherine, but let's go to Gwendolyn first.
Okay, so yes, thank you. And I think this is just a time to kind of re-echo and emphasize the need that we need to be very intentional about when we say our commitment to civil society organizations in the broader context of SDG 16, because it's one thing to be saying this, it's another thing to be very bold and intentional about it. We continue to see that even from the ground, and as we're saying, even from the platform, I just want, as we say, it's an advocacy, really great platform to help amplify our voices and especially what we want to see change. So I will say, let's just be very intentional about it. We cannot say we want to involve and have local voices if we're not very deliberate, because sometimes we know the politics that are involved. I mean, we keep talking about it, but it's about that leadership for peace. And I continue to tie all of these things to leadership for peace component that has to be very intentional and say, let's get civil society, let's support civil society in the broader context of our youth and as well women. And also in terms of addressing the elephant in the room, even from G7+, we need to also work on ourselves and change our own behavior as well. It's something that in as much as we're calling for action, we also need to be able to say, hey, what is it we can do differently? Even as much as we're looking outside, but internally, we also need to be doing peace business differently. So that's just it.
Thanks very much, Gwendolyn. Well received. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you. And at risk of sort of putting different words on the same thing, I guess two points came to mind. I think, none of this work with the private sector is about sort of handing over the ball, right? As you said, Samuel, this is in no way a panacea. And in some ways, we need a real strength of state capacity to build those partnerships. I mean, if you look at UNITAID, it raised billions for global health. I mean, that's an airline tax that's been in place now for years. That required the political will of France and others to bring that through. And I think, that kind of rebalancing of the sort of public-private contract, today Shell made billions of dollars, right, posted. And we need the sort of the strength of the state to be able to sort of rebalance that and have a sort of fairer rebalancing of where the sort of value in our society is landing. And I guess the second point, which is quite different, but, in order to sort of reach over to coordinate with the private sector, we are trying to build that narrative around the business case for peace. Interpeace have done some amazing work on, the sort of the benefits of including this sort of peace positive investment criteria to specific investments, and they're building that data around it. And we need to be able to sort of bridge those worlds a little bit and really just sort of, I guess, keep trying, have a lot of patience and keep investing. This is really, really hard. And it's going to be on the margins where the private sector can play a role, but, we'll find it and we'll keep building on it. I think that's the key for this space.
Thanks very much, Catherine. I think we're all beginning to believe what our humanitarian colleagues have been saying for a long time. Coordination saves lives. Certainly saves money and saves time and energy, but I think it is critical as well. Mariana, over to you, and then maybe we'll take Mark for the last reflection.
Okay, so on the problems on coordination or what's impending coordination, I would say there's two things, at least from our very humble experience. One, you say time. It is, everyone wants to go fast. UNDP, want to go fast. If I go fast, I go alone. And when we try to implement anything, when we're coordinating, we think we're losing time. We're doubling, sometimes tripling the time for implementation because we have to go. It's letters that come and go, and documents have to come and go, and agreements. But this time that we think we lose is really gains a lot on the effectiveness of our whatever action we're taking. And that's one. The second is, another thing is sometimes an unwillingness to compromise. Everyone wants to do exactly as their agenda sets, exactly as the donor has said, exactly how our strategic document said. And we cannot sometimes. So sometimes we have to go through, try to tackle the problem, then instead of tackling the agenda that we decide that should be the one resolving this problem. So there's a certain humbleness that we need, our institutions need to have, to accept that we know part of the solution, but the other actors also know part of the solution. They really need to discuss to be able to tackle. And very, very fast, I'm sorry, on beyond GDP, that's a very important point for us because we strongly believe we have to measure what's the right thing to make the change. If we cannot continue to measure just very standard things, quantity things, how many schools, how many teachers, we really need to start measuring our impact, the impact of our programs, and how the population responding to what they're doing, their satisfaction with what's being delivered. So we need to change what we're measuring if we want to change also the focus of what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And all well noted as well. Speed alone or inclusion and all of us together. Mark, I'm glad. Last word is to you. I think you're still on mute.
Oui, ça va. Merci Samuel. Je voudrais
thank you, Samuel. I just want to say three things on coordination. I'm in agreement with what Mariana has said. I would just add that sometimes we lack data and transparency to better coordinate with certain parts. That's something I have to deal with constantly, daily with my partners. Fortunately, I work with the parliamentarians in the private sector and social society. Transparency nationally and internationally is important if we want to coordinate. I would like to underscore another thing, and I'd repeat that we really have to understand that in SDG 16, there's no growth and development without peace. This is the reality. Unfortunately, they have to go together. If there isn't growth and there's no development, but if there's no peace, then it won't go further. There cannot be growth and development without peace. And it's true that we have to rethink multilateralism. We also have to promote, I think we have to promote a lot dialogue nationally, locally, with local actors. That is what I would say. And I think that as far as the international dialogue is concerned, perhaps we need a special workshop on how to rethink the philosophy and practice of multilateralism. And I also thank you to all of the panelists for what they said today. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for helping me with the wrap up, Mark. I'm glad. I really appreciate it. Very much thanking everyone that joined us today, some colleagues in person, some colleagues online. For those who didn't join, obviously they'll get the recording as well. Once again, thanks to Alliance for Peacebuilding and USIP for giving us this opportunity and again, great to see everybody from IDPS, and on to the next dialogue. All well noted, we've taken good notes, and hopefully we'll be able to share some interesting insights from this particular session with everyone who didn't join. Great to see everyone. Thanks again. Have a good rest of the day.